Hello and welcome to another episode of Socialistics, Social Media Agency Stories. My name is Jason Yormark. I am excited about our guest today. Her name is Elizabeth Pampalone from Absolute Marketing. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. I find your story pretty fascinating and I'm going to dig into some things. But let's just get started with your story. How'd you get started? Kind of work me through your career progression and where you're at today and what you're doing.
Well, I actually started with website design about 20 years ago. So hand coding in HTML back in the day, Notepad++ was my jam. So I started back with that and then I moved into WordPress. I did that for about 10 years. And for the last 5 years, I've been running my current agency, which is like my second or third iteration of it. And that is Absolute Marketing, which is a formula that I developed. And I've been working in pretty much all aspects of marketing for small businesses. And it's really the formula that I had used for myself and all the businesses that I've created and run and sold. And so I was like, you know what, I really should probably use this for my clients because it's really effective. So that's what I built about 4 years ago.
Gotcha. So am I hearing correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, have you always been self-employed entrepreneur? Did you have any traditional 9-to-5 experiences before you kind of jumped into that world?
I did. I was right out of college. I worked for a software development firm and I coded in Access. I did the lowest of the low job you could possibly get.
Yeah. How long did that last?
Well, it was unfortunate because I probably would have done it longer. It lasted 8 months. And then I went through a divorce after 3 months of marriage. My husband left me. And so I really had to start my life over. And when I did that, my parents were moving to Florida. So I moved to Florida about, several thousand miles away and from where we were originally. And I just started a business. My mom was like, you need to start a business because you cannot be employed. I was overqualified for these jobs, underqualified for those jobs. And it was during the recession. So it was like, you just had to start a business.
Got it. So how long have you been on your own? Total
15 years.
15 years. Well, congratulations on that. It took me,
Thank you.
I always knew that I was wired to do that. It took me longer to kind of get there, but it's always interesting to hear people's stories about how they got there because they're so different. Some people figure it out pretty early in life and some people figure it out later in life. And I don't think that there's a right or wrong way. It's just everybody's circumstances are different. So it's always interesting to hear about that. So tell me a little bit more about what you do. You said you work with small businesses, which is always a difficult phrase because some people define small business as the mom and pop shop on the corner. And some will say if they're a $50 million business and they're a small business, which I'm like, no, you're not. So it's a very vague term. So I'm very curious about how do you define small business and what type of clients do you work with and what does those engagements typically look like?
Yeah. So anybody from one person in the business, so solopreneurs, all the way up to people who do not have in-house marketing departments. I think once you get an in-house marketing department, you're kind of up there, you're medium to large. And most companies can even do that with having less than 50 employees. And by in-house marketing, I mean, maybe you have one person who's in your company who you pay full time, who does the website, who does the social, who does, whatever. So when they're not at that stage yet, then I work with them. Sometimes I've worked with people who have just brought in that student that they just hired and they're fresh out of college. They know nothing and they'll hire me to basically train this person and to learn how to run a marketing department of one, if you will. So, so really everything from the solopreneur all the way into, people who don't really have a marketing department and they should, or they've just hired that person to start that process.
Gotcha. So is it just you? Do you have a team? Kind of give me a better sense of scope of your business.
Yep, we do have a team. There are 4 people currently, and my sister, she is just graduating in 2021 this year, and she is going to be coming on full time with us. So I'm very excited about that.
That's great. So I was looking through your website, and it looks like you have a couple different paths for people to or companies to work with you. You kind of framed them up as do it for you, do it with you. I'm kind of curious what if the percentage breakdown of the businesses that you work with, how many of them are, or what percentages do it with them versus do it for them? What do you say?
Do it for you has to be the lowest. This is the person that says, hey, I don't really care what it looks like. Here's my brand colors.
Hmm.
Make me all the things, right?
Hmm.
And they're kind of leaving it up to our discretion to really create everything. They sign off on it and they're good with it because
Hmm.
they're really focused in other areas. And this is a rare type of person, but we have had clients like that in the past. So I leave it there as an option. But with the do it with me, like we're someone doing it with someone, we're working
Yeah.
one-on-one side by side. That is our most popular because a lot of people that come to us, they are startups, they are in that mid stage. Maybe they've been in business 30 years and they've never had a website, or they have an old website from 1992. And so they're kind of at this stage where they say, you know what, I don't really know if I need to have enough money to pay an, marketing firm for, all this extra stuff. But I do want to know what is happening. I do want to know how this stuff works. I want to be involved in the process, and then I'll know who to hire, how to delegate this, etc. So a lot of
Hmm.
people just come to us without the knowledge of these things, and this is what the done with you is really for, that we actually are able to train them or whoever they bring with them.
Hmm.
I have up to 2 or 3 people in the room sometimes.
Yeah. So would you say that the do it with them approach is really about just filling some gaps? They're still owning some deliverables in their world, and you're just kind of teaching them and getting them to a point where they can bring a lot of that stuff in house. In essence, working you're working out of a relationship, or at least lesser of one. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and that's the way I prefer, because I want to set companies up to be self-sufficient. I
Hmm.
want them to be able to hire that summer intern, take an afternoon, teach them some things which they know and they know how to do and they've been doing for months,
Yeah.
and teach them a few things and get that off their plate.
Hmm.
But then also, when that summer intern goes back to school, they can take that stuff back over because they know how to do it. It's easy. It's
Yeah.
very quick and something they can pick back up. And with turnover in staff, I've experienced this many times. I like people, the owners especially, to know the every aspect of what they're doing. They need to know all their financials. I just recommend that in general, but they need to know that things like that. They need to know how their business works, how their sales work, how their marketing works. Because as long as they know how it works, they can
Hmm.
pick up that slack if needed, because turnover happens and things happen with people that you really can't control.
Yeah. I find that fascinating because the world that we live in is quite the opposite. Companies, and it could be just a matter of a different segment of businesses that, each of us are targeting. The ones that we come across are, we don't want anything to do with this. We don't know it. We don't have any interest in knowing it. We know that we need to do it, and we just want to pay somebody to do it. So I'm fascinated by you living in a world where it's a little bit different. How do you, in terms of, client acquisition, like what does that look like for you? How much of it is inbound versus outbound? And, how do you find clients to work with that kind of fit that model for you?
I do a ton of speaking.
Hmm.
And that's when I really find the best clients. The whole webinar thing kind of has been a fad for a while, and I never jumped on that bandwagon because I really feel like a live presentation that is promoted by someone else is
Hmm.
often more
Yeah.
effective. And whether it's in person, which we used to have and is starting to come back, or whether it's online, actually a webinar, but it's a
Hmm.
live presentation. It's not, a pre-recorded thing. So I've definitely found that that's probably my number one way of getting clients, because they
Yeah.
get to know you, you get to experience things with them, and they also, you can help them a little bit. You can give them that value right there on the spot, and you can basically endear them to you
Sure.
immediately. I also find that through podcasting has been another great way. I have my
Mhm.
own podcast, and I
Mhm.
also have guested on numerous podcasts in the last year,
Yeah.
and
So
networking too.
I want to dive into that because again, I was looking at your website and was just amazed at the volume of work that you're doing around podcasting yourself, being a guest, doing speaking gigs. And I'm jealous because it's a combination of I haven't quite figured out how to do more of that, and a time thing, which just tells me I need to make the time and get out of the business a little bit. But take me through what's your process like? How do you get yourself? Well, I'm more so being a guest on podcasts and speaking engagements. Like, what do you do to kind of create a pipeline for yourself of opportunities to do those sorts of things?
Well, I will start with this. I'm an experiment kind of girl. Like, I like to just take a random thing and say, this is what I'm going to do this year, or this is what I'm going to do this month. And I did an experiment a few years ago. I guess it's about 7 or 8 years ago now. And I networked 3 times a day, every single day for 1 year. And my
Hmm.
goal was not to get more business to fill my pipeline. My goal was to become the most well-known person in my city,
Hmm.
so my local area.
Yeah.
At the end of that, like about 9 or 10 months in, so pretty much towards the end of the year,
Right.
I ended up at a meeting. There was 100 women in the room. I stood up, the last person to give my little speech, and I said, does anybody here not know who I am? Because I literally knew every single person in the room.
Yeah.
And no one, this one girl just raised her hand. I didn't even say my name or anything. I just said, I'll talk to you after. And I knew
Yeah.
at that point I had accomplished my little quote unquote goal, right?
Hmm.
And the reason that I did that was because people were saying, "Oh, did you get business from it? Didn't you increase your bottom line?" Well, of course I did. But that wasn't my goal. So I
Right.
wasn't looking at it in a monetary way. I did the same thing with podcasting last year. All my networking was taken away. I was
Hmm.
going 2 or 3 times a week to events and now it's gone, right? And so I said,
Yeah.
"How can I create this one-to-one and one-to-many situation that I get with networking? How can I create that in another way?" And I was like, well,
Hmm.
duh, it's podcasting. And I
Yeah.
started to go on to the directories. I started to apply. I kind of made it almost my full-time job at that point because there were so many things that were removed from our lives at that situation. I was like, well, now I have all this extra time. This is what I'm going to devote it to. And I also found a company called PodScout, and they actually apply to the podcast for you, which I think is amazing.
Hmm.
And so they apply to like 35 a month for you, which
Oh.
is really great. But I started applying in the beginning by myself before I found them. And I applied to about 400 and I got on about 400, 140, total that I actually was on in
That's
2020.
outstanding. Well, I see the problem for me is that I am a closet introvert. So the thought I've always said to people, it's such a strange dynamic. I can get in front of a room of like 1,000 people and do a presentation and feel not only comfortable with it, like I enjoy it. But if you
Mm-hmm.
put me in a room of like 10 people and I've got to go and initiate one-to-one conversations, I'm horrible at that and it gives me anxiety. So that's my problem. Luckily, I don't, luckily, depending on how you look at it, obviously with the pandemic, that it's not really even been an option, but I know that once the world returns back to normal, that's a thing that I'm going to have to get comfortable with. But it makes sense. I mean, I totally get it. I think the thing that's pretty amazing about what you've done is just making that commitment over that extended period of time to have a goal of like, I'm going to do this many times and stick with it. And it's this, and I always say that it's the same thing with like social media. It's like, why am I going to post social media? Well, it's the sum of what you do over an extended period of time that
Right.
delivers results. So you can't think of it like, why am I
Exactly.
doing this today? Like, no, today is
Right.
what's going to really drive, and it's sticking to it and doing it because you never know when you're going to come
Mhm.
across a situation. So that's really great, and I'm definitely going to check out Pod Scout
Well,
because I'm always looking for things
one
like that.
one actual podcast that I was on is the one that it just took one,
Hmm.
and we had a $15,000 sale from
That's
that
awesome.
show.
Yeah, because you just don't know, and I think if you
You
have the
don't,
right
and it
coach,
was
it's like yeah.
it was later in the year too. It was, I'd been doing it for like 6 months already, you know.
Hmm. But you got to
So
stick
yeah,
with it because you just don't know. You probably do like 50 of them, and you don't know
yeah.
when that one opportunity presents itself. So that's awesome. So I want to learn a little bit more about this whole program you have where, and I don't know if I'm getting it right, but basically something along the lines of where you help clients kind of develop social media content for a year, which seems crazy to me. Obviously, we're a social media agency. We think a month in advance, and we think that that's pretty awesome. So I'm kind of, take me through just a little high level about, what is that? How does it work? When you're working with clients to do something along those lines?
Well, it's actually only one of our 5 days, and it's 12 months of social media in a day.
Okay.
So it's even more crazy.
Yep.
It makes me even more insane. But the process for that was the fact that this is what I did for my companies when I was running them. I was running a computer repair company, a marketing agency, a networking company, and a training company all at the same time.
Yeah.
And it was insane of the amount of, oh, and also I was networking. I was running 13 networking groups a month. So I'm running all these companies. I'm running these networking groups. How do I promote them all on a consistent, regular basis, keep the brands out there? And so I developed these formulas that allow me to create this much content all at once. And when I would start a new business, when I would pick up, the new year would come around in December, I'd just devote one day to creating all the social media, and then another day, all the emails for each company, for each thing. It took me like 2 weeks to get all this done because it was so much content. But for all of those companies, it was one day for each thing. And I started to use that with clients. I was doing websites and social media and everything the traditional way, and I was never getting anywhere. Clients would drag the process out. They would go past deadline. They never had quote unquote time for me. And so I was like, this is not working. And I took everything off my website in 2017 and then said, the next person that calls me, I'm only working one day with them, and they're getting whatever product they need in that day. They're going to sit with me one-on-one, face-to-face. And the first person that called me, she ended up booking 3 days, a branding day, a website day, and a social media day. And she's still my client to this day.
That's awesome. So how, in terms of the pandemic, how's it, I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong here, but pre-pandemic, that type of offering would be in person. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Typically?
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, so if that's the case, how has your business been affected by the pandemic, not being able to be face to face with people? And how have you kind of pivoted to be able to continue to do what you do without being able to do that?
I haven't pivoted at all, and it hasn't affected it at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising.
Yeah. So
But
how did you do that?
I actually was meeting with people. Our office was still open. Even during the pandemic, they were allowing certain private meetings, which all my meetings are private meetings. There was no large groups or anything.
Yeah.
And so we would go in, we'd wear masks, we'd sit, one person at each end of the conference table, and we would work. I did several throughout April, May, and July, especially of last year. And then, of course, Florida, where I am, opened up, so we were able to do more. But it was very surprising that people were still willing to go. They were willing to show up. And there's been a couple people who, weren't able to travel because I used to travel to them, or they would travel to me. And we did them through like Zoom or whatever. And that was very difficult. And I found that people have to be on the tech savvy side to do a really good session using Zoom. If they're not on the tech savvy side, I really do need to be in person with them, so I can literally turn my screen around and say, does this look like what you were thinking, and go through things like that with them. And also, it's better to be in person because you have that energy. You're reading the person. You're looking at, is their foot tapping? Are they nervous? Do they like what I just said? What was their facial expression? And so with Zoom, it's a little harder to do all that. And I feel like people don't get as good of an experience, but we've still been doing in-person sessions. We've been doing a couple of Zoom sessions here and there, but mostly in person.
That's great. So is your business predominantly local? Like your clients are local? Do you work with anybody outside of your
people
area?
fly from all over the
Really?
place to see me, right? And I've flown to other places, and I have offices all over the country. So I go and say, hey, this is my office. This is the location, whatever's closest to them. And then I do add a travel fee to those sessions. But when I add the travel fee, most people are like, I'll come to Florida, no problem.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that's great. What I was going to ask, and I just lost my train of thought there for a second. When you think about the business that you've built, we all kind of have our stories about like things that we learned the hard way. So I always like to kind of get insight from folks that I talk to, like what's to the aspiring entrepreneur or agency starter, somebody that's in marketing that wants to start a consulting thing. What's one or two things that kind of stand out for you that you would have done differently, that you kind of learned the hard way, like the best advice that you would give to somebody just starting out to kind of really think about when it comes to kind of jumping into something along these lines?
I would say that it definitely took me a year or two to stick with my niche. So I was saying, okay, the next person that comes along, I'm only going to do this. And I ended up developing the full 5-day program over the course of several months as clients came to me and said, hey, I need this. Can you do it? Hey, I need this. Can you do it? And what I found was that once I had that program and I had those formulas and I had this whole set that I would just do. A client would show up and we would do the set. Now a client would show up and we'd do the set. Now, obviously it changes for each one. It's customized and customizable, but for the most part, it's the same group of 5 days. So we have 2 alternate days that we have as well, but same grouping. And it's the same. We stick to our way of doing things. And I found that when I would take on clients and they would ask me to do things that were outside of that, that were on the edge of it, that were outside of my comfort zone to the point where I didn't feel like it was going to be helpful to them, because I didn't know enough about the product that they were trying to use. I hadn't done, any research, and they just kind of threw it at me. And I was like, okay, we'll try, and I was just trying to say, okay, I'll open my horizons a little bit, broaden that. But I found that my formula was so specific and worked for specific people that person wasn't my client. And I took on a few clients that I don't think I should have. I ended up helping them in the long run, but for me, it was just laborious and lots of research, and it was very tumultuous for our business internally, to try and make these things happen for them. Obviously we did, because that's what we do, but I realized that the clients that didn't request those things and didn't have those special needs, if you will, they were much easier to deal with. We were happier. We were more calm internally. And so I thought, you know what? I need to stick to my guns here. And if a client comes to me and says, well, I want you to do X, Y, Z, and I say, we don't do it that way, we may not be for you, let them go. Even if they had a 5-figure deal on the table, a 6-figure deal, I said no. And I can't even tell you how many times I've had to say no to people, and they've turned away and they've walked away and they've gone to a competitor, which is fine with me because it's not going to cause that internal stress on our company. And that has been a huge, huge help. So I didn't do it in the beginning. I can see definitely where that would put a strain on us. And I would say, make sure that once you have that thing, works, stick to it. You can be you and do it. And not everybody's going to be your client.
You're preaching to the choir, that the power of saying no, which I have said time and time again, it's very empowering. It's hard for people just starting out because it's like you take whatever you can get, but you definitely have to get to a point where you could be comfortable saying no and walking away from things. And we've learned that the hard way. We've said yes to things, and then it just doesn't go well, and it's stressful, and it creates crappy morale, and it's just not worth it. So I could not agree more with that, that once you can get to the point to saying no and being true to who you are is a recipe for success. So awesome. All right. Just a couple more questions. Want to ask everybody this. What's your favorite thing right now professionally? A book, a blog article you read, a piece of technology that you're using, a service that you use? What's something that stands out that you love that helps with you professionally or for the business?
Well, there's 2 books actually. One is called Marketing Outrageously, and that one is by Spolstra. And that one is very interesting. It's an older book, but it's very interesting. And the other one that I read about 3.5 years ago, and it literally saved my business, and especially through COVID. I mean, we probably wouldn't be talking right now if I hadn't read this book 3 years ago, which is Profit First. And that book saved my business.
Yep. I've read that time and time again.
I was on my own at that point, making 6 figures because we had downsized our team during the recession. So this is 2017. Everything was starting to pick back up. This is when I revamped everything and started over with my business. And I read that book. I was making 6 figures and I was paycheck to paycheck.
Yep.
And after I read that book, I can't even tell you, it took me maybe 3 months to get to where I needed to be with it. And to get to his numbers, to get to his, allocations that he was like, this is where you need to be at this bracket. It took me three-ish months. And it was hard. It was annoying. It was frustrating, but I was like, I can't even tell you. And I've gone away from it a couple times during the last couple of years just to I take a break. Oh, I don't need to do that right now. And it totally messes me up. So then I always go back to it.
Very cool. No, I love that. I'm going to check that one out. I'm sure I could use that help. Awesome. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you feel would be useful to share based on what we've talked about today?
Well, I have 2 free things that I wanted to give your audience if they need this.
Yeah.
On my website, getabsolutemarketing.com, at the very top of the site, there's something called the Pro Toolkit. It's all the tools that I use every single day. It's stuff that I vet, and I constantly change that list. So once you get access, you have access for life. And I am constantly adding to it, changing it, updating it. If I get great deals on things, I put those in there as well. And I only put stuff in there that I use. So if it's not on there, if it's on there, I've used it, or I do use it currently, actually. And then I also have a membership. So anybody who is looking for marketing help or wanting to do more with, actually learning to become an agency owner, then I actually have a membership. It's free to join. I have tons of free courses and free challenges in there. I also have some paid courses, and I do monthly sessions as well. There's a guest expert session. We do a monthly training and a monthly networking event.
Outstanding. I don't know where you find the time to pull this off. I'm going to have to check some of this out and educate myself. So thank you so much for carving out some time today. Really great stuff. Where can people find you? I know you talked about the tools, but just the easiest way to kind of find you in general.
Yeah, getabsolutemarketing.com. All the socials are there. And yeah, let's book a chat. I'd love to talk with anybody who wants to talk about marketing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That will do it for this week's episode of Socialistics. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we will catch you next episode.